Alexis Carter, a 17-year-old black girl, stepped into the Boston Luxury Motors dealership, her school uniform neatly pressed but undeniably simple compared to the lavish setting around her. Her eyes sparkled with admiration as she took in the sleek lines of the Lamborghini Aventador SVJ Roadster, a masterpiece of engineering and luxury. However, before she could even approach the car for a closer look, she felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. Blake Thompson, the dealership's sales manager, eyed her with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. His expression barely concealed his condescension as he strode toward her, his polished shoes clicking against the showroom floor. "Excuse me," he sneered, gesturing toward the exit. "I believe you've wandered into the wrong place. These cars are for serious buyers, not for people who are just here to window shop." A few employees nearby exchanged amused glances, barely containing their chuckles, while some customers turned to observe the situation with curiosity. Alexis felt a wave of humiliation rush through her, her cheeks burning under the weight of their scrutiny. Her hands clenched slightly at her sides, but she willed herself to remain composed. She had been taught better than to react to ignorance with anger. Without a word, she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked calmly toward the exit. She refused to give Blake the satisfaction of seeing her upset. But as she stepped out into the crisp morning air, a quiet storm brewed within her. What had just happened wasn't just an insult, it was a reminder of the biases and prejudices still deeply ingrained in places of privilege. What neither Blake nor anyone in the dealership realized, however, was that Alexis Carter was no ordinary teenager. In the following morning, the same showroom that had dismissed her so easily would be forced to confront the full weight of their mistake. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the city in a golden glow, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop in front of Boston Luxury Motors. The luxurious vehicle, its polished surface gleaming under the morning light, exuded an air of prestige and exclusivity. Employees inside the dealership, accustomed to catering to Boston's wealthiest clientele, immediately took notice. A few exchanged curious glances, wondering which high-profile customer had arrived. Others adjusted their ties and smoothed their suits, preparing to offer their most polished service. As the chauffeur stepped out and respectfully opened the rear door, a slender figure emerged, Alexis Carter. But today, she was not the same girl they had dismissed the day before. Gone was the worn-out school uniform and the quiet hesitance. Instead, she was dressed in an elegant yet understated designer outfit, her curly hair framing her face with effortless grace. Her posture was poised, her steps measured and confident. Though her expression remained calm, there was an undeniable strength behind her composed demeanor, a silent but powerful message that she did not need validation from anyone in the showroom. A second figure stepped out beside her, and at that moment, the atmosphere inside the dealership shifted dramatically. The man who now stood next to Alexis was none other than William Carter, one of the most influential real estate moguls in the country. His presence alone was enough to command attention. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit with an air of quiet authority, his sharp eyes swept across the showroom with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up. The moment Blake Thompson, the dealership's senior sales manager, laid eyes on Alexis and her father, his entire demeanor changed. The arrogance, the smirking condescension he had worn so openly the day before, vanished in an instant. His posture stiffened, and his face turned pale as the realization of his mistake hit him like a tidal wave. His mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation, a way to undo what had been done. The girl he had dismissed, humiliated, and deemed unworthy was now standing before him, her father, a billionaire, by her side. Other sales representatives, who had either ignored Alexis or snickered behind her back the previous day, now rushed forward with exaggerated smiles and eager greetings. Their voices, now dripping with artificial warmth, were filled with forced enthusiasm as they attempted to erase their prior indifference. But Alexis did not react to their sudden change in behavior. She did not need to. Instead, she turned her steady gaze toward Blake, her deep brown eyes unreadable yet piercing. For the first time, Blake felt truly small. His usual confidence, the sense of superiority he had displayed so effortlessly, crumbled under the weight of his own actions. The silence in the room was deafening, thick with tension and unspoken regret. His mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something, perhaps an apology, an excuse, but no words came out. And in that silence, Alexis knew she had already won. Blake's throat tightened, his breath catching as he struggled to maintain his composure. A cold sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, suffocating, inescapable. His mind raced frantically, grasping at excuses, desperate for a way to smooth things over. But deep down, he knew no amount of charm or hollow apologies would erase what he had done the day before. He had been arrogant, dismissive, condescending. And now, he was about to face the consequences. Summoning the most practiced smile he could muster, he stepped forward, though his usual air of confidence had noticeably faltered. "Ah, Miss Carter," he said, his voice strained with forced politeness. "Welcome back. I sincerely regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred yesterday. Please allow me to personally assist you today." His hands twitched slightly at his sides, betraying his unease. Alexis remained still, her expression unreadable, her eyes locked onto his with quiet scrutiny. She said nothing, simply observing him. In that silence, it was unbearable. Blake felt as if she could see straight through his feigned courtesy, past the nervous mask he wore, and right into the turmoil beneath. Then, her father stepped forward. William Carter. A man who carried himself with effortless authority, whose mere presence commanded attention. He wasn't loud, nor did he raise his voice, but the weight of his words was undeniable. "My daughter came here yesterday with the intention of purchasing a car," he began, his tone calm, yet unwavering. His sharp gaze fixed itself onto Blake, pinning him in place. She was dismissed. Mocked. Treated as though she did not belong. Blake's stomach twisted into knots. The room around them fell into a heavy silence. The other sales representatives, those who had once smirked alongside him in quiet amusement the day before, now stood frozen, their faces pale with tension. No one dared to move. Blake swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Mr. Carter, I assure you." William lifted a hand, silencing him with a mere gesture. His voice remained steady, but there was a warning edge to it. "I don't need excuses," he said coolly. "I need professionalism. I need respect. If this is the standard of service your dealership provides, then perhaps my business would be better spent elsewhere." The words struck Blake like a physical blow. His vision swam with the implications of what he had just heard. Losing William Carter as a client was not just a personal failure, it was a disaster. A man of his stature, his wealth, his influence, a single word from him could damage the dealership's reputation beyond repair. His pulse thundered in his ears. He opened his mouth, scrambling for something, anything, that might undo the damage. But before he could utter another word, Alexis finally spoke. "That won't be necessary, Dad," she said, her voice composed, yet firm. There was no anger, no gloating, only quiet certainty. She turned to Blake, holding his gaze with the same unshaken confidence she had displayed the day before. "I still want the car. But I don't want him selling it to me." Heat flooded Blake's face, burning with humiliation. He was being dismissed. Stripped of the authority he had wielded so carelessly, so arrogantly. And there was nothing he could do about it. A moment later, another sales representative, one who had remained silent during yesterday's debacle, stepped forward quickly, eager to seize the opportunity. "Of course, Miss Carter," the man said, his voice carefully measured, laced with professional courtesy. "I'd be more than happy to assist you." Blake stood frozen as Alexis and her father walked away, their attention now fully devoted to finalizing the purchase. He could hear them discussing specifics with the new salesman, the conversation flowing easily, efficiently, without him. A deep, sinking feeling settled in his gut. He had misjudged her. He had assumed she was insignificant, undeserving of his time. And now, he had paid the price. Alexis hadn't needed to yell, to demand retribution. She had done something far more powerful. She had proven him wrong. Blake stood frozen in place, his entire body rigid with tension. His hands curled into tight fists at his sides, the nails pressing so hard into his palms that they threatened to break the skin. A slow, burning humiliation spread through his chest, creeping up his neck like a fire he couldn't put out. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts as he tried to process what had just happened. He had never felt so powerless, so utterly dismissed. It was as if he had been stripped of all authority, reduced to nothing more than a spectator in a scene where he was supposed to be in control. His eyes darted toward Alexis and her father, watching as they continued their conversation with the other salesman. They spoke with ease, their body language relaxed, completely indifferent to his presence. The way they had so effortlessly erased him from the situation was a brutal, unspoken message: he was insignificant. They didn't need him. Worse, they didn't even acknowledge his existence. A knot tightened in his throat, a mixture of frustration, shame, and disbelief. For years, Blake had prided himself on his ability to command respect, to control interactions with nothing more than a carefully placed smirk or a sharp remark. He had built his confidence on the belief that he could read people, manipulate situations to his advantage. But now, he was standing in the middle of the showroom floor, stripped of every ounce of power he thought he had. He had miscalculated, badly. And the realization of it stung worse than any insult ever could. The sharp click of approaching footsteps pulled him from his downward spiral. "Blake." The voice was firm, controlled. No anger, no mockery, just an unsettling calm. He turned stiffly to see his manager standing a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. There was no need for an outburst or a scolding. The weight of that unreadable stare was punishment enough. "Come to my office." The words were simple, but they carried a finality that sent a cold shiver down Blake's spine. His stomach twisted as dread settled deep within him. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move, though every step felt impossibly heavy. As he walked past Alexis, he stole one last glance at her. She didn't look smug, didn't appear to be enjoying his downfall. She wasn't gloating or laughing at his expense. Instead, she simply met his gaze with the same unshaken confidence she had displayed all along, calm, composed, unwavering. That was when it hit him. She didn't need to celebrate. She had already won. Blake followed his manager down the long, dimly lit hallway, his footsteps echoing slightly against the polished floor. Each step felt like he was marching toward an inevitable confrontation, a reckoning he wasn't prepared for. His stomach twisted with unease, a heavy knot of anxiety forming in his chest. He kept his gaze ahead, trying to maintain an air of composure, but his mind was in turmoil, replaying the events of the day over and over, searching for a way to justify his failure. The office door loomed ahead, and as the manager pushed it open, Blake hesitated for just a fraction of a second before following him inside. The door shut behind them with a quiet yet decisive click, sealing him in a space that suddenly felt smaller, heavier with tension. The room was orderly, the desk meticulously arranged, but to Blake, it felt cold, devoid of any sense of comfort. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant murmur of conversations from beyond the walls. The manager moved with deliberate slowness, walking around his desk before sinking into his chair. He gestured toward the seat across from him, and Blake reluctantly sat down, his hands clenching into fists in his lap before he forced them to relax. He could feel the weight of his manager's gaze, assessing him, measuring his response before even speaking a word. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the manager exhaled, a slow and deliberate sigh. "Blake," he began, his voice steady but edged with unmistakable disappointment, "do you understand what went wrong today?" Blake swallowed hard. His instinct was to defend himself, to argue, to explain that he had done his best, that the circumstances were beyond his control. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He had miscalculated, misjudged the situation, and now he was paying the price. He forced himself to meet his manager's gaze, the weight of his failure settling heavily on his shoulders. "Yes," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual, almost strained. "I do." The manager studied him for a long moment before leaning back slightly in his chair. His expression remained unreadable, but there was no anger, just a measured, almost expectant patience. "Good," he said finally. "Because this isn't just about losing a sale. It's about losing control. It's about understanding the people you're dealing with. And today, you didn't." Blake clenched his jaw, feeling the sting of the words. They cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He had been outmaneuvered, and there was no excuse for it. the manager let the silence hang between them, giving Blake time to absorb the lesson, to let it sink in. And then, in a voice that was calm but firm, he asked, "So tell me, Blake, what are you going to do about it?" Blake remained still, his mind racing. The weight of the question pressed down on him, heavier than anything else that had been said. He didn't have an answer yet, not one he could articulate. But one thing was certain, he couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. This moment, this failure, would define his next move. And whatever he did next, he had to make sure it counted.